It's another GTN Coaches Corner, and we have another 5 questions to get through. And remember that you can leave your own question beneath any of our videos, and all we need to do is use the hashtag GTN Coaches Corner ahead of it, and we'll be adding it to our wonderful list of questions. So this week we are going to be covering why Zone 2, and is it based on lactic levels, dealing with the post-race blues, how to store race fuel on your road bike, is it my legs or my heart that's slowing me down on the bike? And then we also have setting my running zones using maximum heart rate or lactate threshold heart rate. So a few sciencey ones in this week's Coaches Corner. The first comes from Alison Anderson, and it says here, do any YouTubers actually explain why Zone 2 is the best range to run in? It's supposedly based off lactic acid, 2 millimoles. So why 2? Why not 2.5? Why not 1.5? What is it that is specifically happening at this lactate threshold that is not happening at others? Well, we're not sure about other YouTubers, but we are going to do our best to explain it here. Now, Zone 2 does not refer exactly to what levels of lactate you have. It just happens to be a coincidence that 2 millimoles is an area where a lot of athletes will sit when they're in Zone 2, but a very well-trained athlete might be as low as 1, and some athletes could be up to 3. So it's very individual, and it's not set in stone by any means. But basically, working in Zone 2 or being in that range, so it's an aerobic endurance zone, which basically means that your body is getting enough oxygen coming from your lungs, getting to your muscles, that you can use that glycogen in the muscles, convert it to glucose, and basically turn it into a form of energy through oxidative glycolysis. Basically, when we look at lactate levels, your body will be producing lactate, but it's also being able to process that at the same level. So that's not building up. So your lactate levels should stay at that constant level. Now, hopefully that answers the question of where it sits. But then as to why you want to train in that zone, depends on your running goals. And I would say that if you are doing any kind of endurance, you'll want to train some of the time in that zone, because that is the zone that you will be working at, and it's also going to be building everything you need for endurance. So it'll be helping to develop your lungs, your heart, your capillaries, the mitochondria, the powerhouses within your cells. All of this is going to be being pushed whilst working in Zone 2. And if you go as low or as easy as Zone 1, then you're not going to be pushing these systems as much. And if you start going into a higher zone, then you're going to be working in different systems, and you won't be purely focusing on that aerobic endurance aspect. And obviously, if you will be racing and you know you're going to be racing outside of Zone 2, you need to include other work. That's a whole nother conversation about how you actually structure your training. But Zone 2, if you're an endurance athlete, does need to play a large part purely for building those base blocks, which we do have videos on when we go into why is Zone 2 important. But hopefully that's given you a little bit of an insight, and hopefully we have helped answer that very specific question. So thank you for that one. Moving on to Steve G. Bond says, I did it. I am an Ironman 10B. I cannot recommend enough, but despite the celebrations and even knowing it may happen to me, I've struggled with post-race blues for the last few days, about a week after my first Ironman finish. Any tips to get me through this? Well, first up, it is normal, and I'm glad to hear that you've actually spoken to other people who are experiencing it as well, because yeah, it's kind of crazy. You think, oh, you'll have this rest and you won't have to be training and you'll feel great. And you have such a high from completing it. Congratulations, by the way, for doing your first Ironman. And it is an epic achievement. So you're going to be on an absolutely massive high. And sadly, we can't all stay on a big high because life isn't like that. So you're naturally going to have to come down. And to start with, you will hit probably quite a low point, not only because of the emotional excitement and all of the psychological aspects, but also because physically your body is going to be working so hard to recover. It's going to be taking all of your energy. You might not be sleeping so well, but you'll need more sleep. So you need to prioritize the physical recovery part of it. So if it's a little bit of active, but not obviously too much, I'm glad you're not back in training yet, but going for walks or doing anything that's active and stimulating, maybe being outdoors, but not taking up too much energy. Eating well doesn't mean just because you stop training, just eat a load of rubbish. That's not going to help you feel great. So you still want to have a healthy diet, obviously with some treats, but allow yourself to just have that time and be kind to your body and try not to overthink it at the moment. And we've all been there. I remember when I did my first Ironman, and then I decided I was going to do another one 6 months later. And initially I felt great, so I got it a bit later. And then when I came back to training at sort of 5 weeks after, I felt worse then. So in a way that you're kind of going through it now, and hopefully you'll start to progress. But it's just natural, even if it's not something physical. I think if we get a promotion or you do a massive assignment and you hand that in, you have this great high, and then it's a little bit of what next. So it's a little bit of how the human brain works, and we naturally have come downs, but that means that we'll be starting to look forward to the next high. And it's just, life is very much a matter of ebbs and flows, and sometimes we just have to accept that, let it go, and then once you're physically recovered and starting to have more energy, you can start to look towards maybe the next goal or the next thing in your life that you want to look forward to. So I just say, hopefully by the time this has gone out, you're already starting to feel back to your normal self and just celebrating your achievements. So stick with it. Congratulations. Next, we have Nick Van Dam says, "Hi coaches, I have an older road bike with clip-on aero bars and have been considering fuel storage. I want to stay in the aero position as much as possible. Are there aftermarket fuel storage solutions that work with externally routed cables? I wasn't sure if an aftermarket bento box or strap-on bag would work with cables. Thanks." Well, yes, there are options that should work. And my first road bike also had externally routed cables, and I managed to find a bento box, or sort of more of a soft box, so to speak, that just went on with Velcro and managed to fit it around the cable. So it will be maybe a matter of trial and error. Could be worth taking your bike to the bike shop if you're going to buy your top tube bag from there and finding something that works. Alternatively, if you wanted to spend a bit more and want to change your setup, you could potentially ask your bike shop to reroute your cables through the top tube, just so that it looks a bit tidier and gives you more options. Although that is a bit of an investment. You've also got the option of, if this is purely for, say, your gels, you could decant your gels into a bottle and have them somewhere on your bike elsewhere. So you've got a few things to play with, but I definitely reckon there is a solution there, just working out what's best for you. And then we have Alon618 with this question. "I want to get better at cycling, like all of us, but I feel that my legs are limiting me. Weak legs during hard workouts keep me from pushing high power. My heart rate is not that high during hard workouts, max 185, and during hard workouts, heart rate is about 160 to 170-ish. What should I do?" Well, first up, if you are able to hit numbers and your heart rate is high as 170 and your max is 185, then you're getting pretty close, especially if that's for a consistent period of time. Everyone's bodies are different. Some people find it easier to get their heart rate higher when running compared to cycling. There's various factors that contribute to that, depending on what your background is, etc. But I'm certainly someone that can't get my heart rate as high on the bike as I can when running. So I would focus more on actually what your training is looking like. And if you're worried about the pure strength in your legs, focus on that. Don't worry too much about your heart rate. If you can train with power, then even better, then you can really focus on the strength of your legs. But look at doing hills, look at doing low cadence work that's going to focus more on that strength aspect, working for set periods that are at a more of a high intensity, doing long durations at a steady intensity. Basically, make sure you're mixing up your training and you're ticking all of those boxes, and your legs will get stronger as long as you're training correctly. So focus on that. And it sounds like your heart rate is totally in a fine place. So nothing you need to worry about on that one. And then we have our final question. This is a meaty one from Joanna Montero. "Hey GTN, I recently did a lactate threshold test with a chest strap and got a lactate threshold heart rate of 185. A few days ago, I recorded a 198, which I'm guessing is my max heart rate, or close to max, since I've never gotten a bigger number. I'm 24 years old. My question is related to setting running zones. If I use max heart rate, then my zone 2 would be 119 and to 139. But if I use the lactate threshold heart rate, my zone 2 would be 157 to 165. Given that these intervals are so different, would you recommend I set my zones based on the max heart rate or lactate threshold formula, or maybe somewhere in the middle? Also, can you give me some insights as to why my lactate threshold heart rate is so high, about 94% of my max heart rate, as I'm a relatively new runner and not terribly fit? This doesn't make a lot of sense to me." All right, there's a lot of numbers to process there, but I'm going to try and break it down and also make it relevant to everybody else watching. So first up, your maximum heart rate is likely to be higher than that. Because if you just recorded that in a typical session where you've not done a max heart rate test, your max heart rate is likely to be a little bit higher. So I wouldn't get too bogged down on that number exactly. And then the fact that you've gone and done a lactate threshold heart rate test and you've got numbers from that, we're going to presume that that is accurate, and that is great to have it. So generally, if you've got you've had your lactate threshold measured and you've got zones for that, that is more likely to correlate to how you should be training, what zones you should be in, compared to working it out from your maximum heart rate, because it's just naturally going to be more accurate. But on screen now, we've actually got the zones to compare. So based on a lactate threshold heart rate and on maximum heart rate. And you'll see that for zone 2 lactate threshold heart rate is, as you said, 85 to 89% of lactate threshold heart rate. For maximum heart rate, it's 73 to 80%, not 60 to 70%. So that would end up being in zone 1. So for you personally, this gives you a lactate threshold zone 2 of 157 to 165, like you said, and max heart rate zone 2 would be 150 to 164, which is much closer. But basically, that's obviously specific to you, but the main takeaway is here, if you've had chance to do a full test for getting a lactate threshold heart rate, then I would calculate those zones and train by them, because obviously you're pretty fortunate to have that, and that should maybe need updating every so often, but you'll start to get an idea of how you're feeling in those zones. And like you talk about most predominantly in zone 2, you'll start to get a feel of how that should be as well when you're doing most of your training in that. So moral of this story, for anyone watching, if you've only just going with maximum heart rate, that's fine. But if you can do more thorough tests and have more accurate data to go by, even better. Okay, if you're still with me after all of those numbers, thank you for making it to the end. I'm going to give you a thumbs up. If you want to give us one, we'd love that too.